We're coming from Tu-Bishvat, and I really feel this is a worthwhile endeavor. This is from Igris Kedesh, Chelik Beis, if I'm not mistaken. If it's not Chelik Beis, it's Chelik Aleph. On both sides of the page, you have the same letter in two different drafts. The Rebbe wrote the letter to a Yid whose name is Beis Rivka or Beis Rivka, and there's a story about this fellow himself also, which I'll tell you momentarily. And apparently afterwards, the Rebbe rewrote what he had written to him in a more isolated, out of the context of the letter kind of a way. It is a short little commentary on Tu-Bishvat, and I think it's very special. It's a very rich geschmacke, and yet so simple and basic commentary on Tu-Bishvat. I just want to tell you I'm going to read the letter written to the person who's I addressed. I made copies of both sides so that you can read it twice if you so desire. It's almost the same thing. It's restructured a little bit. I want to tell you who this fellow is, this Beis Rivka. This guy, Beis Rivka, lived in France, where the Rebbe lived in France. The reason I know this is because there was an interview done of him. I think he has since passed away. But he was interviewed by the Kfar Chabad magazine. He knew the Rebbe in Paris. And he was an unusual man, certainly for his time. The Rebbe was such a friend of his. And this is in the middle of the war. He had apparently come to the United States, and the Rebbe is writing him this letter. What was unusual about him? He was frum. And he had a secular education. He had gone to college, university. In those days, if you had a secular education, you were secular, which basically means that you were a pashat apokritis. Things have changed quite a bit. Although things remain the same, things have changed quite a bit. In those days, learning in a secular environment meant that you listened to, you had a regular feed, a consistent diet of cynical, mocking, derogatory remarks about religion. It still goes on in universities, but with a little less kavanah, because as science grows, their sureness in the belief that there is no God diminishes, and it's a fact of life. 100 years ago, it's hard for you and I to relate to this because we're so young, but it's a fact. 100 years ago, culturally, in other words, the way people saw the future of the world, there were many, literally millions and millions of people who believed that in a short time we're going to rid the world of the klipa called religion. There's not going to be any more religion. No one is going to be stupid enough to believe in God. That's literally what people believed. The communist revolution happened in certain parts of the world, but culturally the whole world was pervaded with an anti-God sentiment. There was a Russian philosopher, I don't know his name, but there was a Russian philosopher who once said absolute truism. He said, as long as there are Jews, there's proof that there is a God. Which of course explains why a lot of people want to get rid of the Jews. To get rid of the Jews, Baruch Hashem, the Eibishter dies. But that's not happening. They're not getting rid of the Jewish people, and they're certainly not getting rid of the Eibishter. Over the last 100 years, there's been an ongoing culture war. Again, I don't know how much people understand the meaning of the word culture war. Culture war is a war of ideas. Right? Everybody knows what wars are. War is a place where people get together and officially kill one another. And it's sanctioned by governments, and even the United Nations says, okay. But there's a culture war is a war of ideas, an ideological war. And culture wars never stop. They're ongoing. We're from a Yidden Baruch Hashem, so we're not involved in a culture war because we have no questions. We're Jewish people. We practice Torah Moshe, which Hashem gave us at Sinai, and that's it. We don't mind doing the same thing for thousands of years because it's still modern. It speaks to us. But in the world, there is a war of ideas. If you go back 300 years, 400 years ago, pretty much most people, Yidden and Goyim, lyhadus, believed in God, one way or another. Over the last few centuries, there's been an enormous challenge to that emunah, and we're actually seeing the end of that. The idea that somehow knowledge is going to replace the Eibishter has proven itself to be a wrong idea and a destructive idea. In other words, today, most people, including people who are secular, realize that they need religion. Unfortunately, religion to them is not synonymous with Hashem. It's certainly not synonymous with Hashem Echad. It's certainly not synonymous with Teiras Hashem. But mit der Zeit, there's a huge culture war that goes on. And because of this culture war, people have their minds changed and altered, right? This was the war that Rebbe Hashab fought and the Friedrich fought and the Rebbe is fighting. It's a war of ideas. It's not a war of killing people. It's a war of winning a battle of ideas, that the infinite Torah, the timeless Torah, the Eibishter, should be proven to survive all the ideas that come and go and change over the course of time. So 100 years ago, more so than today, if a person was exposed to secularism, it was almost impossible to remain frum, because there was such pressure. You were made such fun of. The Eibishter was treated with such a lack of respect. Today, in certain parts of the world, the Eibishter is still treated with a lack of respect. But it's not anywhere near what it was 100 years ago. Most intelligent people will say, yeah, you have to think about the Eibishter. Anyway, this fellow was an educated, was a scientist. He had studied in Chochmas Chitzenius and was frum. And he tells the following episode in his interview, that there was a club of Jewish scientists that used to meet periodically in Paris. The Rebbe lived in France, in Paris, and there was a whole club of Jewish scientists that used to meet in Paris. All of them, except for two, were secular, were not frum. And understand, when I say not frum in those days doesn't only mean they didn't keep Torah mitzvahs. They literally didn't believe in God, and their excuse for it was science. The two frum members of this group were the Rebbe and this fellow, this Beis Baratka. So naturally, the Rebbe and him had a relationship, had a friendship. His business, his parnasa he made from making glass. He had some kind of a sophisticated glass factory where he used his science, his chemistry, whatever he learned, in producing his glass. And the Rebbe was a good friend of his in France. Of course, when the Rebbe became Rebbe, he couldn't meet the Rebbe on a regular basis. But I just want to tell you one little story that he relates, then I'll get to the letter. This group of religious scientists used to meet once a week or once a month for discourse, for discussion. They were, I'm sorry, not religious, Jewish scientists. And the system that they set up was that each time they would meet, one of them would give a discourse, would say a whole speech on a certain area of science. And the design was he would give out, let's say a week in advance, or 2 weeks in advance, a letter, a note, with source material on his chosen topic. And afterwards, when he would come to the discourse, the people present would be prepared, and he would make his presentation. So it came to Rebbe's turn. The Rebbe prepared a discourse, and he wrote down a bunch of source material on an issue of science he was going to discuss. And at the top of the page, he wrote the date. Whatever the date was, let's say January 7th, yeah? And he wrote 5,693 since creation. And of course, you understand yourself what happened. Everybody got very upset. 5,693, you kidding me? The world is billions of years old. But the Rebbe was trying, as he was trying to get their goat, he was bothering them, anyway, so when it came time for the Rebbe to make his presentation, before he had the chance to open his mouth, what he hoped would happen. Someone said, that's ridiculous. The world is 5,693 years old. There's evidence that the world is billions of years old, or millions of years old, whatever it was, hundreds of millions. Anyway, so the Rebbe responded. And basically, instead of giving the so-called lecture that he prepared, he gave them a lecture on the age of the world. And he quoted all kinds of sources, especially from Zohar. This is what this fellow says. And he showed them that there is no conflict whatsoever between Taita's idea of the age of the world and science. And when he was finished, the whole group of secular people stood up and they gave the Rebbe a standing ovation. They were very impressed by the Rebbe's presentation. Anyways, this is another whole thing. It's a discussion unto itself. But the Rebbe, over the years, has not only been explaining the questions of science and religion, he goes out of his way to start up with the question of science and religion. In the early years of the Rebbe's Nesius, the Rebbe would make a point of saying that Torah says such and such, and nothing in Torah can be contradicted by science. There's a book which you could now buy in English, which I'm currently reading, which is part of the reason you're hearing all this. It's called Mind Over Matter. I don't know if you've seen the book. It's not. You can't read it in the bathroom. Besides the fact that it's the Rebbe's letters, you have to think what you're reading. But the Rebbe answers all of the science and religion questions in a very, very clear and direct way. And it's interesting. It's not just how what the Rebbe writes, but how he writes it. He writes it incredibly. He writes it as if I have to apologize for religion? Science says again and again and again and again, we're never sure we know what we're talking about. So I should apologize for religion. And the Rebbe is very frustrated by scientists who are frum, who feel the need to apologize for religion when there's nothing to apologize for. Anyways, that's what this name means to me. This fellow, Bez Baratka, stirred all of those feelings. But I'm starting on page Reish Mem Zayin, if you have the letter in front of you. V'gam, the third full paragraph. That's what I'm going to begin with. V'gam. This is a Tu-Bishvat letter. It's short and sweet, but it's delicious. Okay, I'll read and I'll translate and we'll try to discuss it. V'gam inyan yema de paga de chaydish, writes the Rebbe to him. I want to address or make reference to the special occasion, the Yom Tov, which exists in this month. Who, Yom Reish Hashanah lyhadus, is the day which is the head of the year for trees. Now, first of all, I'm sure you understand what it means, the head of the year for trees. Trees actually sleep, at least most trees do, right? When the leaves fall off the tree goes to sleep, it hibernates. And when it comes spring, the tree comes back to life. That's why, as you probably are aware, trees have rings. Right? Why does a tree have a ring? Because it literally stops metabolizing, it stops growing, and when it starts to grow again, there's a distinct line which indicates every line is another year. The wake up, the good morning, the Maidani of a tree is actually Rosh Chodesh Shvat. Rosh Chodesh Shvat. But you don't know, by the way, this means in Eretz Yisrael, not in Brooklyn. If you don't see blossoms on the trees, this means in Eretz Yisrael, because everything goes out to Eretz Yisrael. When do you actually see that the tree woke up? In other words, when did the tree produce signs that it's alive again? It takes 2 weeks. Tu-Bishvat. And that's why you probably are aware that there's the famous machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. When should be Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan? Beis Shammai says Rosh Chodesh Shvat, the first of Shvat, because that's when the trees actually begin to live. And Beis Hillel says Tu-Bishvat, the 15th day of Shvat, because that's when you actually see the signs of life. In Chazal, it's stated as follows, that the Tu-Bishvat has to do with Nidainim Alamayin. The water, the trees are judged for water. So it takes 4 months from when the water is judged until the tree is judged. From Sukkot till Tu-Bishvat is exactly 4 months to the day. Tesvav Tishrei, Tesvav Shvat. It takes 4 months from when the new water is blessed for the tree to begin to be yoynei, to be nourishing from the new waters, the new year of water versus the old year of water. But whatever the case is, Beis Shammai counts from Rosh Chodesh because that's when the tree actually begins to nourish or begins to wake up, so to speak. And Beis Shammai did it from Tu-Bishvat because that's when you could see the signs of life of the tree. The tree comes to life, actually you could see it. Now, of course, the big question is, who cares about trees, right? What do trees have to do with us? This is the million-dollar question. Why do we care about Rosh Hashanah is enough for us to deal with. The new year, the first day of Tishrei, we have to get judged, we have to do tshuva, and so on and so forth. Why do we care about what the Mishnah says, the 4 Rosh Hashanahs, right? Tu-Bishvat is another one, Rosh Chodesh El is another one, and of course, the first day Sukkot, where we judge for the water. Those are the 4 Rosh Hashanahs. Why do we care about the new year for trees? Let me put out this question. Does anybody know the reason? How is it important for us to know when is Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan? Okay, we're not talking about philosophy now. I mean halacha. Oh, very good. Well, truma, it depends. Very, very good. The answer is because it literally means a new year. In other words, fruit that begin to grow before Tu-Bishvat are last year's fruit. Fruit that begin to grow after Tu-Bishvat are this year's fruit. For example, everybody knows what Shemitah is, right? Shemitah is from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. Till Tu-Bishvat of Shemitah year, all the fruit is still last year's fruit. From Tu-Bishvat of the 7th year, all the way till Tu-Bishvat of the 8th year, because if there's fruit that grows Sukkot time of the 8th year, that's Shemitah fruit and you can't eat it. And as you mentioned, the same is true of Adla. When you count 3 crops, you count from Tu-Bishvat to Tu-Bishvat. There's a lot of halachic relevance, a lot of dinim that have to do with how you count a new year. But understand that this is only a new year for trees. It's not a new year for wheat and barley. It's not a new year for beans. It's not a new year for fruits and vegetables. It's a new year just for trees and fruit trees. The new year for Chita and Sa'ida is the same as ours, Rosh Hashanah. But the new year for trees is a Chodesh or Tu-Bishvat.
About fruit.
Sorry?
What about things that are fruit that don't grow on trees?
Right, fruit that don't grow on trees. Right, they're Ber Piadama, so they don't have the same seasons as Tu-Bishvat. Their new year is Rosh Hashanah. Okay? So that's why halachically Tu-Bishvat is relevant for us. But of course, in addition to the halachic relevance, there's the spiritual relevance. We live in the big city. None of us have ever seen anything that remotely resembles a farm. We don't have not issues of Arla, not issues of Neterevoy, not issues of Truma, Maisa. None of those issues matter to us, especially in Chutz La'aretz. Nevertheless, Tu B'Shvat is a special day. We actually don't say Tachnun, right? And the Rebbe is going to explain the Hasidic significance of a tree. I read now inside. There's a lot of things we can learn from the significance of a tree. Now you'll read this, you'll see that the Rebbe is writing to a person who has a knowledge of the sciences. The way the Rebbe writes to him, the Rebbe is aware that he knows Chochmas Chitzonius, and the Rebbe is writing to him in kind. A person who pays attention to everything around himself, including nature, from absolutely everything, Yosef Chochma al Chochma, say he or she will grow in his wisdom, in the relationship and the conduct of a person in his relationship with Hashem, as well as between man and his fellow. In other words, Tu B'Shvat is not only a day that has to do with farmers and agriculture and halacha, it has to do with avodas ha'adam. We have to learn a lesson that affects our relationship with Hashem and our relationships with our fellow. It doesn't necessarily require an extraordinary event, a very radical thing, a very extreme, crazy, unpredictable event to occur, like a miracle, to spark us, to stir us. There are phenomena that are very, very available. We see them all the time. Like a tree that grows. Still, there are there are numerous lessons. In the daily life of a person, of man, which we can understand and appreciate from them. So the Rebbe says we have to learn a lesson from a tree. Says the Rebbe, I want to observe various factoids, various aspects. And he says, most plants, especially trees, it consists of a variety of parts. That in general can be categorized into three parts. Shadish, the roots from where the tree comes. Gufa ilan, the body of the tree. And then in parenthesis, Rebbe writes Geza, the trunk. Anafim, the branches. Alim, the leaves. And then Pedis, the fruit. What do fruit have? Klipa, an external shell which protects the fruit naturally. Hapri atzme, the edible part of the fruit itself. And garinim, the seeds, right? Fruit, I'm sorry? Garinim, right. Fruit exists so that we should eat the fruit and throw away the pits. In other words, most living things don't like to be eaten. That's their nature, right? One of the few exceptions, something which wants to be eaten. Hashem made trees to produce fruit. Fruit were made to be very attractive. You should want to eat them. Why? Because when you eat the fruit and you throw away the pit, especially if you digest it and you swallow it, it'll plant another tree. So the gara, the seed which is inside the fruit, is what the fruit is interested in, that you should eat the fruit and plant a second tree. But of course, our interest is the fruit itself. So the Rebbe says, what can we learn from these three basic building blocks of a tree? Its roots, its body, trunk and branches and leaves, and its fruit, which is the shell, the edible fruit, and the seed, the garinim. The distinction between these three parts is as follows. Hasherish, the root, you cannot see it, it's invisible, it's under the ground. Avo, but actually, ikir chayes ha'ilon al yadei nimtza. Notwithstanding that the roots are under the ground, the life of the tree, it comes from the roots, right? Roots are very, very, very important. Mostly for the sake of water, right? The water seeps into the ground, and the roots, the bark absorbs the moisture, and it sends it up to the top of the tree, and that's how the trees grow. Afshagam, although the truth is that also, ha'alim, through the leaves, shayafam he'ilanis min ha'avit, the leaves also draw life for the tree. Chumrim means compounds. Hamuchrachim l'chayim, needed for the life of the tree. In other words, for example, the leaves are the mediums by which the body absorbs, the tree absorbs what we call carbon dioxide, right? Carbon that the tree needs to procreate, to make it, to generate itself. V'chein, in addition, keltim hachayim mekarnei hashemesh. The leaves are the conductors, are the carriers, are the reflectors that bring to the tree sunlight, which is very, very important, right? For a tree to grow, you need basically three things: water, carbon, and oxygen. Carbon and sunlight. And so the carbon and the sunlight, the leaves draw into the tree. But the moisture, the life of the tree comes from under the ground, from the roots. Moreover, in addition to the fact that the predominant source of life for the tree comes from the roots, there's another point. And that, of course, is trees can't stand without roots. Only because of the roots, the tree stands on its place. If the roots are solid and strong, there will be no fear of any winds that blow, that should be able to rip the tree out of the ground and make it fly away. Right? Everybody knows how that looks, right? On Montgomery Street a little while back, a 50-foot tree was taken down by the wind. The roots keep the tree firmly planted in the ground. So there's the two things you know about the roots. Three things. The roots are invisible. You don't see them. But the ikar life is from the roots, that's number two. And number three, the roots are an anchor. To stay in one place, you need roots. Number two, guf ha'ilan, the body of the tree. Naturally, it's the majority. Most of the value, most of the matter of the tree is its body. The trunk and the branches and the leaves. The mizman from time to time, every year, there's an increase, ba'oivi, in the density and the thickness of the trunk, ba'anafim in the branches, uba'alim in the leaves, achal yodei, and in fact, that ultimately through the tree itself, especially considering the trunk of the tree, yivadu or yedu shnei will know the age of the tree. In other words, the rings of the tree determine. This is literally true. If you take a tree and you cut a cross section, you'll see rings. It'll tell you the exact age of the tree. What's even more interesting is you could look at the rings and know what kind of seasons there were. There are trees alive today that everyone said that were present b'shas matan Torah, that are well over 3,000 years old. And you could look at the rings. Some rings are fatter and some rings are thinner. What does it prove? A thinner ring shows that it was a very deficient year, there wasn't enough water. And a thicker ring shows that it was a blessed year. And you can literally look at a tree and determine what happened 1,000 years ago in terms of rain and all these kinds of other factors, judging by the thickness of the rings or the thinness of the rings. So you can know a lot about a tree by its rings. So by the way, this is true of all hibernators. You should know the polar bear, for example. To pull out a tooth, they can cut a cross-section, they also see rings. All animals who start and stop, there are many animals that sleep and then they wake up again. They have these rings in their teeth.
That sounds in a coma.
Sorry? Like somewhat, I mean, a person who's in a... tell how old they are, hopefully you'll wake them up. But we don't sleep, so it grows continuously. You can see the rings, and you can also determine the health and the condition of every season based on the quality of the different rings. But okay, whatever the case is. So, the body of the tree tells us what? First of all, the body of the tree grows. In contrast to the roots that you never see, the body grows. And the body tells you about the tree. What is the tree? Who, of course, the ultimate end purpose of a tree is paydays, to produce fruit. Because of the seed, or the gadin as you called it. It plants its seed, to bring about new trees, generation after generation. Okay, so a tree has roots. And what are the roots? You cannot see them. The life of the tree, and they keep the tree anchored. The body, which is what continues to grow, it's the bulk of the tree, and it tells you the quality of the tree. And the fruit are the product of the tree. Now I want to tell you something. And I sort of allowed myself to speak to you a little bit through, so to speak, a scientific bend, because the letter is written in that kind of a form. I want you to understand the difference how Torah looks at fruit, and lyhadus how biology looks at fruit. In Torah, what is the fruit for? To eat. To eat. The Rebbe says in all the sichos, what are fruit? Fruit are not food that you need. bread you need, water you need, perhaps you need, on some level, a little bit of meat. Fruit are a luxury. Fruit are made as an item of pleasure.
I mean, there's so many vitamins that are fruits that you can't get from anything else. So you could live on bread and water.
Okay.
You don't need to be
your question notwithstanding, I'm not going to disagree with your question.
It's life and death, not health and not health. Put it that way.
Okay, well, I'm not so sure it's that simple, but according to Torah, it's this way. I hear your point. I'm not, so to speak, answering your question. I'm just telling you how the Rebbe explains it in the Sichos. We can debate the credibility of what you just said a different time and understand that knowledge is cumulative. In other words, that right now you read books of medical science, they'll tell you that if you don't eat fruit, your life is going to be shortened. Things will change. They always do. And again, I don't want to get into that debate. According to Torah, fruit is considered a luxury. You're saying it's a necessity, medically, biologically, fine. According to Torah, the purpose to eat fruit is to have pleasure. So let's agree to say that we're talking about two different issues. Fair enough? Okay? We'll leave the discussion for another time. To a biologist, fruits are not for people to eat. Fruits are to plant new trees. It's true according to Torah that fruits have seeds which allow you to plant new trees. The reason for the difference, when Torah talks about a fruit is first of all for a person to eat, second of all to plant a tree. A biologist tells you a fruit is really just a way of a tree advertising, come and eat me so I'll have a baby, basically. Because if you eat the fruit and you carry the seed 10, 20, 100 feet away and you drop it there so there'll be another tree, there's a very important reason why Torah looks at a fruit, first of all, is for people to eat. And lyhadus, in biology, a fruit is for planting seeds. And the difference is very, very simple. According to Torah, the purpose of creation is for people. Period. Everything serves a person. And because everything serves a person, the purpose of a fruit is to feed a man, or a woman, or a child. The fact that it also helps procreate the tree, that's good. But in the end, why do trees exist? Why are there fruit? Why are there seeds in fruit that people should eat? Lyhadus, Chachma says in biology, what's the purpose for trees? Anyone know the purpose of trees? That there should be more trees. And the biggest concern that that scientists have is that, God forbid, people are going to eat up all the trees and there never won't be any more trees. Now, I'm not trying to say that it's not important for there to be trees. But I'm just saying it's a whole different focus. Yiddishkeit has always taught and continues to teach. What does it say in the Chazal? Everything in the world serves man. I was created to serve my Maker. Therefore, what is a tree? What a person gets from it. Certainly, people are not allowed to destroy. And forget, people need the power of regeneration, of life being reproducing. They should have what to eat tomorrow and next week. But the purpose for trees that people should eat. In biology, the purpose for trees is that there should be trees.
No, that's more purpose.
I'm sorry?
A big purpose for trees, according to biologists, is that there should be clear oxygen because they purify the air. That's a big thing why they don't like to cut down trees. Not so much they want there to be trees.
It's a little bit more complicated than that. But in the end, they want there to be, whatever the explanations are, they want there to be trees.
They want there to be trees. But it also comes back to themselves. Biologists are just as selfish.
No, it's not coming back to themselves. It doesn't come back to themselves. No. It comes back to nature. It comes back to nature. No. Biologists religiously have a problem with the idea of man being the center. Exactly. That's what I mean. Biologists, in principle, have a problem with the idea of the purpose of the world being for people. We're just another monkey. The purpose for nature is nature itself. The reason to preserve nature is for the value of nature itself. And that's exactly my point. Torah says the purpose for nature is people. Of course, Torah agrees it's very important for there to be oxygen, and there's a lot more complicated than that. Of course, there's this issue of global warming, and if there's global warming, there's a release of too much carbon, there's too much carbon. It's very, very complicated, and it's, first of all, based on what scientists know today, which is probably very far from the truth. In 100 years from today, they're going to have changed their minds very, very considerably. But my issue is not the science. My issue is this. Torah says that Rebbe created the world for people. The world services people. That's why it exists. What is the fruit? For a person to eat, not for there to be another tree. Whatever the explanation for the needs for the other tree. In the end, everything centers around Adam. This is why, like I said, in many sikhs of Tu-Bishvat, the Rebbe talks about the centrality of the fruit. It's all about the fruit. Certainly, you have fruit, you have seeds. You have seeds, you're going to have more trees. But in the end, it's about a person being nourished. And lahavl in a chokhmas chitzenius, it's about the tree being preserved. Okay. In any event, so this is what a tree is. For the third time, the roots. You can't see them. They give life to the tree predominantly, and they keep the tree anchored. The body is the tree itself, and it tells you about the echos, the quality of the tree, the age of the tree, and so on. The fruit are the purpose for the tree, and most importantly, because they have a seed which is going to allow it to be planted to produce a second fruit. Now comes the nimshal, v'hinei. Ha'adam eitz hasada, man or a person is eitz hasada, analogous to the trees in a field. Haini, asher b'kama pratim, in a variety of details. Deima ha'adam, a person is compared l'mashanira be'ilan v'eitz hasada, to this that we see in a tree and the eitz hasada, the trees of the field. V'afilu b'chayav haruchnim, even in our ruchnizik lives, we can learn an enormous amount from a tree. Here also we're dividing it up into three. There are three parts to the structure of a life of a person that parallel the three parts of the structure of a life of a tree. And obviously what they are is where you come from, who you are, and where you're going. Just like in the tree, the roots are where the tree comes from, the body is what the tree is, and the fruit is where the tree ends up. And the same is true in a person. Hashayrish, what is the root of a tree? Hiyamun, this is faith. Emunah. Asher al yadahu kishure imakim umaker chayusei. Through faith, we're connected to the Eibishter. Makim means place, but you also know Makim, like Baruch HaMakim means the Eibishter, who's the word of our life, who Abedi is Baruch, which is the creator of the Eibishter. That va'av kishagadol b'chochma teiru mitzvahs. A person may grow in wisdom and teira and mitzvahs. Chayesei, his life, nimshach le'aydei emunasei ba'avaya, comes to him from his faith in the Eibishter, dasei, his religion, v'teirasei, in his teira. What is emunah? Emunah are the roots. Emunah are the roots. The foundation of a Jew is emunah. And what is the ironic thing about emunah? It's covered, right? Lubavitch is a hard case in point because Lubavitch does talk a lot about emunah. But you go to school. You've been going to school now for whatever number of years. You sit in class. How much time do you spend talking about emunah? I would say, first of all, not enough. But aside from that, relatively speaking, a small amount of time. The majority of the time you spend in school, you're gathering information. You learn halachas, you learn Torah, you learn how to do mitzvahs, you learn minhagim, you learn ideas of Torah theory, but discussions about emunah per se are frequently deficient. You don't learn much of it in school. I'm sorry?
That's why it could be more compared to roots, because it's a person thing, so it's more hidden. It's not something that you're... In a classroom, in a structured forum. Right, so why would you sit down and talk about emunah and stuff? Like, you're saying that you're encouraging that people should sit there and talk about more emunah, or... Okay, wait. It's a good point. Hey, hang on a moment. First of all, when do we get our faith? When we're little babies. The whole structure of a Yiddish chinuch, and especially a Hasidic chinuch, is based on the fact that when the baby is mamish an infant, we pardon me for using the word, we brainwash them. We fill them with emunah. The belief, of course, is that we're not giving a child emunah. The pasuk says, you should rear a little boy or girl according to his way. Gam ki yaskin, even when he'll get older, he won't go away from it. Correct? What does the Rambam chat in this pasuk? I'm sure you learned this from somebody sometime in your years in school, right? How does the Rambam interpret this pasuk? Rambam says that children cannot be expected to be altruistic. You can't expect children to do things Hashem Shemaim. It's not fair. You have to give them incentives. So when a child is little, child goes to school, so when they're very, very little, you give them cookies or fruit. You get a little bigger, you give them toys. You get a little bigger, you give them money. And finally, when they get too big for all those wonderful things, you give them
Flattery. You want to motivate a person, tell them how wonderful they are. Yeah? And then the Rambam writes, all of this is called Shalei Lishma. This is an artificial, this is a chitzoniistic motivation to be a Yid. What's the belief system? The belief system is that if a person begins his or her life on a level where you, so to speak, bring Yiddishkeit down to them, you don't say, do it l'shem shamayim. Do it because I'll give you a candy or a cookie, or do it because you're a Talmud Chacham, you're special, your Zayda was holy, whatever excuse you come up with. But you give them a motivation that's not based on l'shem shamayim, it's based on ulterior motivation, something pleasureful or ego enhancement, whatever it is. God, they'll get bigger, they'll start doing it l'shem shamayim, right? If you've ever learned Hilchas Tshuva Pedek Yud, the Rambam's Laws of Tshuva, chapter 10, talks about what he calls Oyeved Me'ahava. What's the highest way to serve Hashem? Out of love. As I said in Rambam, Oyeved Me'ahava, and the example of Ahava is Avraham Avinu, when he writes, you should begin letting people do things for the wrong reasons, and hopefully they'll grow slowly but surely until they'll grow to a level of doing things Lishma, in the Rambam's beautiful words, Oisa es ha'emes mepnei ha'emes, you do the truth only because it is the truth, v'seif ha'teva love of the goal. The reward will come by itself. Is that Chassidus? What I just described. That when you come to a little child, you bribe them, give them ulterior motivations to do things, in the belief that eventually do things just mine. Is that Chassidus?
No, because it's that inside. No, because this is that you don't start off.
Just like a child,
You don't start off the same thing. And they're open to Baal Tshuva. The whole thing was that people like Baal Shanta would go around with these people who didn't really learn and he'd say, okay, let's teach them how to learn. So fine, they don't know what they're doing. They're just doing it.
Because they're not. No,
but then they will come to.
But if we break it down to our level, that is Chassidus. That's
Chassidus explained that the pasuk that says if you look at it, it really means mitayef. It means because inside he really does want to do. Therefore, when he does it, and he thinks he doesn't want to do, but inside he really has an actual kiss that really wants you to do.
You know what? Forget about philosophy. You all grew up in Chassidish homes, yeah? Were you raised this way?
No, we're forced.
Is that how you feel? I'm very sorry.
We're because we were taught to go outside. We were taught to get people to like.
I'm talking about when you were 2 years old and 3 years old and 4 years old. How was child is raised?
They raise it in the sense that, like, they say, okay, if you do this, you can do your homework, you complete.
Is that how it's done?
Then you give you prizes. Yes,
that's how it's done.
You don't do your
charts and homework. Okay.
We didn't do it, but everybody knows. You
didn't do it. You know what? Everybody thinks everybody else is making charts and nobody's making charts. Okay, Rabbi Yossi, I don't want to get personal with anybody, but that is the opposite. The Rambam is the opposite of Chassidish Chinuch. And we're not saying the Rambam is wrong, the Rambam is speaking on a certain level. Chassidish Chinuch is based on an assumption. No, let's not talk about Kabbalah sale, because the Kabbalah sale is terribly, terribly over-invoked. And in other words, we say it without truly making people understand what we want from them. We're talking about little children. Little children don't have a sense of Kabbalah sale. I've never met a child who has any aspect of his life that's unexciting. I mean, we suffer from boredom, from distraction, from scatterbrain, and you know, in our wonderful, wonderful, crazy world, the age of the onset of those ills is younger and younger. You know, you used to get bored when you were 13, now you get bored when you're 6.5. But children, life is a party. The moment the child opens his eyes and rolls out of bed, until the moment it can't stand anymore and climbs back into bed and mommy has some peace, life is one big pleasure. This is the nature of children. And to be quite honest, it's the nature of people. Society basically kills us. All the stupidities, whether it's not healthy food, as you mentioned, or it's exposure to garbage, whether it's television or computers, which are a nice thing, but they also it takes away human creativity. And all these other factors, they take away the natural vitality. See, when you see a little child running around all over the place, you should really say, I'm supposed to enjoy life as much as that person does. Now, I'm smarter than the baby. So what life is to me is a lot more than what it is to the baby. I appreciate the value of knowledge. I appreciate the value of hard work. I appreciate the value of responsibility. I appreciate the value of loyalty. I appreciate the responsibility of doing things for the long term. Children don't have any of those values. But I love my life the way a child does. That's called living, to be very, very honest. But Chassidus Chinuch is based on a premise. And the premise is the following. Nobody has to make anybody believe anything. Emunah is part of the hardwiring. It's part of, what do they call it? The software and hardware. It's part of who we are in essence. A child is born. The neshama came from Gan Eden. A person is never closer to Gan Eden than when they're born. Why? Because life hasn't corrupted them yet. Now, of course, from the moment of birth, we're affected by life. Even before birth, we're affected, like it says in Tanya, from the Levusha, from our parents and so on. But we get older, the world has more and more an impact on our lives. So the natural soul me is complicated, is covered over. You don't have to make children believe. Children naturally believe. The world calls it naivete, stupidity, yeah, with lack of caution. They don't understand how dangerous the terrible world is. Yeah, that's not how Yiddishkeit sees it. Yiddishkeit doesn't see the world as terrible, to be quite honest. Yiddishkeit sees the world as wonderful. It's one of the things that Rebbe repeats over and over again, always talking about Basi Lagani season, that the world is a garden. And the childish love for life, the childish natural belief is coming directly from the nefesh alakis. It's not coming from the nefesh abahamis. It's not only psychological, it's pashut spiritual. And therefore Chassidus says, when you want to raise a child, first of all, it's not about incentives. It's not how Chassidim operate. It's not how Chassidus operates. Giving them reasons to do mitzvahs. They don't need reasons to do mitzvahs. They know better than you why to do mitzvahs. Hashem said, that's all. For a child, that's more than adequate. We have to understand. We have problems. Children don't have those problems. You probably know that. I'm sorry? It's okay, fine. I don't want to start up with your ego either. But when you're little, Kabbalah self is less of a factor. When you get older and you have more of a Yetzer Hara, Kabbalah self becomes more and more of a factor. Whatever they do, children enjoy. Whatever a child does, he loves. It's really true. And if the child is doing a mitzvah, they love doing the mitzvah. A child is studying Aleph Beis, a little 2-year-old is licking honey, or a 3-year-old licking honey off a page. They love what they're doing. They're not doing it because you made them. In hindsight, you say we made them, but that's not what childhood is like. Childhood is a very exciting, positive, simple, but exciting part of life. You don't have to teach children anything. Children have a natural sense of faith. You know the story with the Frierdiker Rebbe? I'm sure you heard the story. I'm not finished. I won't keep you. That he was a little boy and his father told him, how do you do Moed Ani? You know the story, right? You sit up, put your hands together, say Moed Ani. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, Farvos. He asked him why. The Rebbe Rashab wasn't happy with the question. He called in an elder Yid, a 70-year-old Shamish, and he asked him, how do you do Moed Ani? He says, I sit up, put your hands together, Moed Ani. He says, Farvos. Azay metat gehez. My father told me so. That's a child. The foundation of Jew is Amunah. We learn about Amunah before we learn to read. The formative years, the part of your life, to be very psychological, that you don't remember. But what are the earliest memories that you have? 5, 4.5, 6? Before they don't remember. What happened before that, those are your roots. This has been proven not only religiously, it's been proven psychologically. You know, they have all these early interventions now. The government invests billions of dollars into taking care of kids who are 2, 3, and 4 years old. They're not going to remember any of it. Why? Because literally what happens to you till you're 5 is your whole life. And for a Yid, it's Amunah. Little children are fed and surrounded by and filled with Amunah. It's the roots. It's not the fruits. It's not the body of the tree, and obviously I'm not going to be able to finish reading the letter. You can read it on your own. The body of the tree is Torah and mitzvahs. The fruit is how we influence others. But the roots, the foundation of Yid is our Amunah. It's the part of our lives that we take for granted. And to be quite honest, there is such a thing as a sick Amunah, an unhealthy Amunah. And it's very, very sad. Because an unhealthy Amunah is like a tree who doesn't have good roots. You're never sure where you are. Your foundation, what do roots do? They keep you in one place. A Jew has no questions. A Jew doesn't need answers. A Jew has no questions. A skeptic needs answers. And a skeptic who has all the answers in the world is still tentative. If you can answer every Apokritos' question, he's still not a believer. It's not the same thing. Faith has to be covered. Faith has to be in your kishkis. It has to be in your childhood. Okay.